Now, I've already reviewed the Hyundai IONIQ 5 in depth, but I just had to get my hands on this. This is a 2022 Hyundai IONIQ 5 two-wheel drive version. It's the more affordable IONIQ 5, and instead of having an all-wheel drive platform, it's just sending power to the rear wheels. I want to find out if you should buy this one or should you spend more money and get the all-wheel drive version. And if you want to see a full in-depth review, which I've already done, you can see that as a link floating above my head, or you can jump in the description down below for that review. But here I'm going to point out my favorite and least favorite features and see how this thing drives over a road trip. This thing is going to rely on a third-party charging network instead of Tesla's supercharging network, so it'll be interesting to see how this thing goes. Now, with that out of the way, my name's Cameron. This is Product Review Cars. Let's get into it. So if you just go for the rear-wheel drive version of the IONIQ 5, you're going to be paying $71,900 before on-roads and before incentives. This is a whole $4,000 cheaper than the all-wheel drive version, and for some that might not sound like a lot and you might just go and get the all-wheel drive version, but for others $4,000 can go a long way, especially with electric cars, like buying some additional charging cables or upgrading your home for a faster charging setup. So that's why this car is so important to review, because we want to see if it's worth saving your money and putting it somewhere else. So as I've already mentioned, I've already done a full in-depth review on this car, so I'm just going to highlight some features that I like and some features I don't like after spending some time with this car. For starters, I like how you can't tell the difference between a rear-wheel drive version of the IONIQ 5 or the all-wheel drive version, so you're not going to be shamed for saving a bit of money. Now, I really like these pop-out door handles, which are flush with the car when you're driving, or you lock it, and then if you go to unlock the car, they pop out and they work really well. Those are cool. I also like how the charging door is able to be open and closed via the key. That's something futuristic. And I also like on the inside this pixel effect, which shows you how much charge you've got and how it's going without even having to look at the car. That's quite cool, and you can just close it with a press of the button or on your key. Now, another slightly annoying thing on the outside is that this car doesn't have a rear wiper. Instead, it relies on airflow coming through this rear spoiler to wipe off any dirt and debris. Obviously, you can see here, it's not doing a fantastic job getting rid of all the dirt and debris. So that is something that I just wish this car had, would be a rear wiper, just in case you go to a real dusty or dirty area. Now, who doesn't love a front boot? With the two-wheel drive version, you actually get more space up front than you do in the all-wheel drive version. It's only by a small amount, but it's very useful, and you get additional space for your charging cables and whatever you want to put up here. Now, another cool feature you can use from the outside of this car actually has to do with your key. And what you do is you go ahead and remote start the car, and you can actually shuffle the car forwards and backwards just using the key. And that's really good if you have a garage that's tight to get into between the wall and your door, or if you hop out of your car and say probably could have shuffled forwards a bit more, you can easily do that with the key without even having to jump inside the car, and that's pretty cool. And finally, for the outside features, this is a pretty cool light setup we have here. We have these pixel effect headlamps, which are nice and bright, and also I love this light bar that runs across the front. Just looks futuristic and really ties in well with the styling of this car. Now, there's a couple of cool features in here that make the IONIQ just a really cool car. First of all are these seats. They're these zero gravity seats, which have plenty of adjustment. You even have calf supports. But what's interesting is that when you go to lean back, you start to lift off the ground, which is kind of cool. And it means you can just sort of have this floating effect and just relax and feel like you're suspended in the air rather than sitting in a seat. I really like how this seat feels, and it's great if you're waiting for a charge. Additionally, these two 12.3-inch displays are nice and big, easy to read, and very easy to use thanks to a simple UI. I think Hyundai's nailed these, although yes, maybe some functionality improvement can be brought in without having to hide heaps of things through menus, and also maybe having a home button would be quite nice to jump between Apple CarPlay or Android Auto back into your systems on your main screen. But apart from that, these are fantastic screens, and I think they're some of the best in the industry. Now, what I really love is this sliding center console. This is really smart, and it just gives more room for the rear passengers or allows you to have a better armrest up front. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of the climate controls down here. They are a little bit weird to use. Obviously, you get used to it, but they're not as intuitive as other climate controls found in Hyundai's cars. You have to jump between warmer if you want something like heated seats or a heated steering wheel, and then you also have to go through this screen here to get rear seat heating controls as well. So that's just something that's slightly, possibly a little bit complicated to go between a hard button and then into the screen. And now if you're someone who has a shorter USB cable or likes having the phone near them without having a cord running through the car, unfortunately the cord for connecting connecting your phone to the center screen here is all the way down the bottom. So you have to reach down and put your phone in there, or you have to put your phone up here with a cord running up from the actual bottom of the car, which is slightly annoying for someone who doesn't like the look of that, but I mean, maybe it's a good thing so you don't have to touch your phone or feel tempted to touch your phone because it's all the way down near your feet. Now, something that's slightly annoying and my brain just crosses wires every time I drive this car is that the way you select drive, neutral, and reverse is actually the opposite to how you would select it in a normal automatic car, with drive being towards you and reverse being away from you. This has drive away from you and reverse towards you when you're twisting the dial. So in your brain, sometimes you feel like you're gonna go, okay, I gotta go in reverse, you flick it forwards, then you're in drive, and the car goes forwards, you're like, oh, hang on. So it's just something that is a little interesting of a choice there, but I guess maybe that's the most logical thing, with drive being forwards and reverse being back. You twist it in the direction you want to go. Now, I love the glove compartment here. It's a drawer instead of an actual levered little space. So the drawer makes a whole lot more sense. It's a whole lot more usable, and I wish more cars implemented this. Now, I'm actually not a big fan of this magnetic space that they put here on the dashboard. I think it's a bit of a waste of space, to be honest. It's meant to hold magnets and little notes there. I think the idea is cute, but really, who's going to use that? I'd be very surprised if I saw anyone actually putting magnets here on the daily. It sort of reminds me of the Volkswagen flower holder that they put in the Beetles. Now, what else is good back here? We have 2 USB ports, which is great. We also have some netting, which is quite good as well to store items for anything that you might need. I also like how these seats are electronically controlled to slide forwards and backwards. Very useful. I like that a lot. I also like the sunshade back here, and I also like how we have rear heated seats back here. Now, something that's a little annoying is that we don't get the AC adapter inside this car like other markets get for the IONIQ 5. It means you can't plug in a household plug underneath your seat. Instead, you have to do this. Now, if you're someone like me and you've been watching too much Stranger Things, which have like hour-long episodes, and your battery's dying on your laptop and you want to take it with you on a trip, well, here's your giant portable battery, because you can open up the charge door just like that, and you can plug in this thing called vehicle to load. So this just goes in the charge port just like that, and you open this up to reveal a household plug, which is great. And that's powerful enough to power anything that a household plug can manage to power at home. So we can go ahead and my laptop's charging. Look at that, great. Now, this is a quick, short drive to tell you the difference between the rear-wheel drive version of this car and the all-wheel drive version of this car, because it really comes down to the drive, and that's something that you're probably not going to have the opportunity to do, hence why this drive is actually quite important. Now, a side-by-side comparison would be preferable, but that's really a bit hard to schedule in. So instead, you've got me, who's driven the all-wheel drive version, and I'm now driving the rear-wheel drive version, so I'm going to tell you which one is better. And the answer is, yeah, they're both pretty much the same. In terms of, it depends what you want. For 90% of people, the rear-wheel drive version is going to be the one to get. Now, yes, we are missing a motor up front, but that gives us a bit more boot space and it makes this car a little lighter. It also means that because we have the same battery pack, we actually get a bit more range with the rear-wheel drive version, which a lot more Aussies would prefer than sacrificing the range for a tiny bit more grip and a little bit more acceleration. Now, on paper, 7.4 seconds to 100 does not seem quick, but I can tell you now that with 1 gear and instant torque, it feels a whole lot quicker than that, and it still thrusts you back in your seat. Obviously, it's not like something where it feels like your organs are getting rearranged or anything like that, and even the all-wheel drive version of this car didn't really have that much of a brutal acceleration feel. Obviously, it felt more rapid than this, but it doesn't feel like a car that goes 0 to 107.7 seconds. That is an on-paper figure, and the more we drive these EVs, the more we realize that different figures mean different things, and 0 to 100 times really are irrelevant, to be honest, for EVs, because that instant torque feel and that single gear without having to change gears and just having power on demand all the time makes this car feel a whole lot quicker than it might appear on paper. Now, how's the grip? Well, we're on a dry section of road, and the rear-wheel drive system does a really good job of keeping this car planted. The wheels and tires all work together beautifully here. There's no understeer, there's no snap oversteer, for example. The traction control works really well in this car, and all in all, the IONIQ 5 rear-wheel drive version is actually a very planted car, thanks to its weight and also the smart motors that are happening at the rear. It's not a traditional rear-wheel drive car, which has a differential that goes through a gearbox, that goes through a internal combustion motor. Instead, we have electric motors just at the back, and it makes this car a lot more responsive to any sort of changes in traction. Now, steering feel is pretty much dead. That's a matter of fact. Even shifting into sport, it gets a tiny bit heavier, but it does not feel direct at all. This is a heavy car. It drives a bit like an SUV in terms of the steering feel. Yes, you can point and shoot where you want to go, but you are going to feel like you're in a bit of a heavier and weighted car. And then in addition to that, the actual suspension here is really quite nice. Even though we're riding on 20-inch wheels, it's actually quite forgiving. But that does mean when we go through a corner, for example, coming up through these sharper bends, let's go up through them. Yeah, you're going to feel this car sort of wallow a little bit, not in a traditional sense because the batteries are nice and low, you do have a low center of gravity, but they are sort of, you know, this is a comfort setup suspension. You are going to feel like you're going to want a bit more chassis stiffening or suspension stiffening when it comes to going through corners if you want to drive this like a sports car. Now, we do have regenerative braking on demand, which is quite good using these paddles, and I usually keep it in iPedal mode, which is the most aggressive regenerative braking system, and overall it's actually quite good to use, and it means that you can sort of operate on a one pedal driving system, meaning I don't rarely touch the brake when I pull up to a stop. Yes, it takes a little adjustment to sort of work out how much stopping distance you need, and usually I always overestimate it and stop up short, so it's quite an effective reduction gear. But if you don't like that, you can use the paddles to go through and make this drive a bit more like a traditional car, which just sort of coasts along when you lift off the accelerator, and you can use the brakes a bit more. But I would recommend trying to learn yourself into one pedal driving because that's going to be a way to save energy and also save your brakes as well. So the more you use regen braking, the less likely you are to go through a set of brakes, and the more likely you are to sort of conserve your battery consumption, which is quite cool. However, turn the speakers off, or even if you have your speakers low, or you're just driving by yourself and not talking to anyone, you can hear the seats rattle against the body of the car in the back, and it's sort of really annoying. Something I experienced on the last car, a bit more pronounced, but here it's still happening. So I just wish Hyundai would work a little bit more on the dampening for some of the hard materials, knocking against other hard materials. I know it's a hard challenge, but it does become more apparent when you don't have an engine or a gearbox wearing away. But all in all, this feels like a very luxurious driving experience, and do not be fooled that you need more power than this. Even loaded up, this will feel like plenty of power, and because this is an EV, you just sort of got to switch your head a little bit as to what you should expect for EVs and how they perform with less power on paper than petrol cars. So overall, I could confidently say you could buy this rear-wheel drive car and not even have to worry about getting the all-wheel drive version, unless you were driving on unsealed roads or constantly going down to the snow, for example. You might want that all-wheel drive system instead. This is what it's like to road trip in an electric car here in Australia. This is a Hyundai IONIQ 5, that's it with full charge, and we were driving from Sydney to Canberra and Canberra to Sydney in one day using third-party chargers and not using a Tesla supercharging network. The car itself is a great road trip vehicle. It's super spacious, great seats, great speakers, and this cool big sunroof. Here's us at the first charger, and guess what? Didn't work. So to wait for these other guys to hop off the chargers, this is another Hyundai IONIQ 5, pretty rare, there's only like 500 in the country. There's the charger that didn't work. Once we got into a charger that did work, I had to park halfway in a disabled spot just for the cord to reach. So it's a bit sketchy, just like our view. Once we got going again, we made it to Canberra, and look how nice this is. So worth it, right? So yeah, it was pretty in Canberra, but then we had to get back on the road. It's a 3-hour trip, so we had to go find some chargers. This one didn't work, and the Tesla wall chargers don't seem to work with the Hyundai IONIQ 5. These were taken up by some Nissan Leafs, and here's the same problem with this Tesla wall charger here. Luckily, this magnet was keeping me sane this whole time. Finally, we found a free charger after what felt like a long time, and here we go. Yes, excellent. I'm super happy, and it's super slow. So I didn't want to wait 4 hours to get 100%, so I had to find a fast charger. This fast charger was blocked by some utes. This one, we couldn't find it, even though it was on the maps. This one was taken up by another Tesla, and then we found this one in a car park, but it was the same speed as the one in IKEA, so we ended up having to jump back into Goulburn, charge there, and then finally made it home after all that. Now, should you buy a Hyundai IONIQ 5? Well, this rear-wheel drive one is definitely the one to get. It is a fantastic EV, it comes with space, features, and it's a nice, efficient EV. I really like this car. Now, if you don't want a Tesla, this is going to be one of your best options. But if you do want a Model 3, for example, the Model 3 is faster, 0 to 100. It's also got access to Tesla's supercharging network, and it's cheaper. So it's one of those cars you have to really not want to go ahead and buy one of these, because the Model 3 is just such a strong contender still. If you want the Polestar 2, that is a sedan shape, it is smaller, and also it has a few less features than what this offers. So that's just something to acknowledge. So when you spend your money up into a Hyundai IONIQ 5, you're definitely getting your money's worth for what more you spend than those two options, unless you really want a Tesla. Now, this car definitely deserves all of its praise as World Car of the Year. I definitely consider getting one as a daily driver. I think it's fantastic. Although, yes, that road trip is fun and it's easy to do in this car with this amount of range. You know, 430 kilometers is plenty usable, but yes, using third-party chargers is still a bit of a pain. And that's something you can't get over until it gets improved, because you have to do a bit more research so you don't get stuck going to the charger that's in a hotel car park, for example, and costs like $30 to use, and it's slow to charge. So that's just something to be aware of when you're driving this on a longer road trip. But I'm still confident to take this to major cities as long as I know where the chargers are along the route, which this does have integrated into its navigation, but it's just not as seamless as what Tesla has with their supercharging network. But all in all, if you're thinking about getting one of these, you should have put your name down yesterday, because these things are in really high demand, and it's definitely going to be worth your while putting your name down if you really want to get one of these. It's that good. It's like driving a luxurious car that's looking after you, but it gets the looks like a supercar because of this design. If you don't like this design, but you like everything about this car, that's when you're going to have to wait for our Kia EV6 review, which is coming out in a couple of weeks. I'm very excited to drive that car, and I'm sure you're excited to see it. So you don't miss out. Make sure you hit that subscribe button down below so you don't miss out on any future EV reviews here at Product Review Cars. That out of the way, my name's Cameron. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.